Today I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the deep desert of Dune Awakening. Specifically, I wanted to do a little bit of speculation as to what exactly building inside of the PvP zone of the deep desert is going to look like. Recently, I've been somewhat concerned that building a base inside of the deep desert is going to be harder to do than I had originally anticipated, and that's mainly because a lot of people are saying the deep desert is like 85% sand, and they're pretty much correct. The deep desert is really just a boatload of open sand dunes. But inside of the last dev stream that they dropped, they did go into the deep desert, and it's inside of this showcase where we are actually getting a little bit more of a realistic grasp as to what it's going to look like to build inside of the deep desert. Let's go ahead and start to get into this thing. So inside of the dev stream here, they showcased one of the 81 tiles that we're going to see inside of any given deep desert, and they showcased it over the course of 3 weeks. If you don't know, the deep desert gets hit with a Coriolis storm at the end of each week, which completely changes the way that each of the 81 tiles is laid out. You can see here in, let's say, week 1 of this tile's lifespan, you have a point of interest right here with a mountain, a point of interest right here with a mountain, and then one right here as well. But other than that, this is all just open sands. You have a shipwreck right here, but all of this is just open sands. And when it comes to playing solo inside of the deep desert, I'm really not looking to try and hide a base next to a point of interest. And it was like this compounded with the fact that arguably 80% of this tile is just open sands, and I was starting to get a little bit concerned that building inside of the deep desert might be a little bit more unrealistic and maybe something that is going to have to be locked down by a guild, just because I'm not going to have many options to hide a base in. If there are only 3 mountains in each tile, it should be pretty easy to check all 3 of those mountains, is what I'm saying. So I wouldn't be able to kind of like hide a little cheeky 1x1 like storage hole. When it comes to the second week of this tile, you do kind of see the same pattern here with the mountain and POI, mountain and POI. You know, most of the mountains are tied with POIs. However, you do have a little outcropping right there and a little outcropping right there, though that's literally right next to a shipwreck. That's not the point. There is at least this one outcropping here. But then again, aside from that, it's just a bunch of sand on and these little spice harvesting zones. I'm not sure if these are where plumes are going to come out, but if it is, let's say this is where a plume is going to come out, you're probably not going to want to be, you know, posted up in a little hidden base right on this mountaintop. Like, if I'm being real, best case scenario for me looking at building a base inside of the deep desert as a solo would be for like a mountain range to be like out here, and it be like a pretty big mountain range with no POIs that I can like hopefully tuck a little base into, like inside of the cliff, you know what I'm saying, somewhere out of sight. Thankfully, when we jump into week number 3 here, you do kind of see what I'm looking for. Yeah, you have a big mountain range with 2 points of interest here, but I might be able to tuck a base right there. And yes, you've got another mountain range, but you can see there's spots up in this upper region where I might be able to hide a base. And even more interestingly, so you have this group of, mountain ranges right here with no points of interest that are decently sized. So realistically, if this was a tile that I was coming at and thinking about building at the deep desert, it would most definitely be right down there in this bottom right-hand corner. And honestly, in just looking at these images, I was getting a little bit stressed out, thinking it might be a bit harder to build inside of the deep desert than I had originally anticipated. However, they also flew into the deep desert itself inside of this dev stream, and you get some footage here that I think shows us a better overall picture as to what it's going to be like. For example, if we pause the video right here for a second, right as they are entering the deep desert, you can see that there are little plateaus and little outcroppings of rocks and mountains that are all over the place in this one little tile here, which is another sign that gives me hope that some of these tiles at least are going to be a little bit more densely packed with rocks than at least I'm anticipating. I'm picturing the deep desert being a lot of sand and a lot of empty space in between points of interest. But when you take a look at this picture here, it's not even the mountain ranges that you can see that interest me the most. It's in fact the ones that you cannot see that I'm the most intrigued about. For example, if you were to take this ornithopter and just fly way off to the left over here, I'd imagine that eventually you're going to run into a tile that has as many outcroppings as this one does. However, clearly you can see from this picture here, none of those are rendering in. So there is going to be a bit of a rendering distance when it comes to these outcroppings, which means that picking a smaller outcropping of rocks to try and tuck a base away in may actually end up being an advantage for a solo player. And if we move the video forward just a little bit and pause it again, you can see actually off in the distance some really big mountain ranges that are still rendering. I am curious as to how far out these mountain ranges actually are, because if they're halfway across the deep desert and they are still rendering in, you would imagine that these are going to be spots where people are going to go and check out. So picking that as an area for a solo player to go drop a little 1x1 down to try and put like a little sneaky base down might actually be like the worst place to go, because a lot of foot traffic is going to be in that area. But we're still kind of thinking one dimensional with these bases inside of the deep desert. We could also potentially put one down at one of these big mountains and use it as sort of a safe spot. So we can come out, see if there's any foot traffic, try and pester some people. Gets a little too hot, we go hide in our base, right? Eventually it's going to get blown up, but nothing's in there, right? It's also entirely possible that these mountain ranges that we're seeing way, way, way off in the back are just some sort of like backdrop. But with the way everything else has worked in this game so far, I just highly doubt that these are some sort of billboard slapped up in the back. Let me know if you guys happen to know down in the comments. But another thing that slightly concerned me is the actual size of these outcroppings, right? Because when you're in the sky, they look a lot smaller than they actually are. And we get an example here inside of the video where they fly down to this control point here, and we get a little bit more of a picture as to what the scale is for these outcroppings. And they're decently big, definitely big enough for you to hide a little 1x1 or possibly even little 2x2 safe place where you can store your uniques or research your schematics. And I also want to point out, as they are heading to this spice plume here, that there is vast open spaces of desert. It's not at all like the Haga Basin. There are your rocky outcroppings that you're going to find, but I think you're also going to very much so have dozens of tiles within the 81 tiles that are in fact just sand. As they're flying up on this spice plume here too, they do like several 360 scans of the deep desert, and far out as the eye can see, you see absolutely no outcroppings. However, I can almost guarantee that there are outcroppings the further you go, which definitely leads me to believe we've got a render distance thing going on here, which is absolutely huge for solos and definitely something that you should keep in mind as you're picking the spot where you want to plant your base. After that spice plume, one of them actually flies off to showcase one of the labs inside of the deep desert, or at least what the rocky outcropping for the lab looks like. And you can see here, this thing is actually pretty massive. And with the fact that the lab itself is located on one side of the island, you may actually be able to get away with putting up a little small spot hidden away next to one of these points of interest, you're definitely raising your chances of having that place spotted. So I wouldn't maybe keep the most valuable loot there just in case it does get raided. But again, each of these outcroppings is actually pretty dang big, so you might be able to tuck it away in a spot where people just are not going to fly by. They also take a little bit of a look at the map here, where we get to look at some of the resources in the immediate area, which is another reason you might be interested in plopping down a small little outpost where you can possibly be a bit of a pester to anybody harvesting resources in the area. So I was slightly concerned that building inside of the deep desert as a solo was going to be a bit of an unachievable task. However, the more I dig into it, the more I'm starting to think not only is it going to be achievable, but there are actually several options that we can use in order to make this whole thing work out in our advantage. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and if you plan on building out inside of the deep desert. I've got a video breaking down exactly what tile and what solo game plan I have. Check that out if you haven't already. We're also going to be going live right here on YouTube and on Twitch for the early access launch of Dune Awakening, where we're going to be implementing our day one speedrunning strategy and hopefully rocketing ahead of the competition. I'll have a link to the Twitch down in the description. Be sure to stop by on day one to see how our progress is going. Hit that like button on your way out. It helps these videos out tremendously when it comes to getting pushed into the algorithm. But other than that, I hope you guys all have an amazing day. I'm out.